Good morning. My name is Terry Ilott. I'm the director of the Film Business Academy at Cass Business School. We have our subject this morning is strategies for global success, the new economics of content, and I'm very pleased to have a great panel. On my left is Claire Enders, who set up Enders Analysis in 1997, having worked in a number of roles within the industry, and she's now a advisor at a senior level to many players in the industry. To her left, Casey Harwood, who's a senior VP at Turner Europe and has responsibility in particular for the digital development group and for work in Europe, Middle East and Africa. And on my right, David Livingstone, who's head of marketing and distribution at Working Title and has been involved in the marketing and distribution of a number of the most successful films in the UK, going back to Trainspotting, Four Weddings and a Funeral, and others. We don't have Tom McLennan, who couldn't be with us this morning, but we'll manage without. So what we're going to do, I'm going to talk briefly, I hope, on the subject before inviting the panel to make comments, and then at a certain point I'll invite questions also from the floor. So the subject is about the economics of content, it's about strategy, and it's about global. And I think that what's predicated on this subject is, will film go the same way that we've seen music go? Will film get enmeshed in the kind of difficulties that we've seen recently terrestrial broadcasters get into in ITV in the UK, in particular, in trying to come to terms with the new economic reality? Media and entertainment globally, since we're talking globally, is a business worth about $1.8 trillion, of which film entertainment is about 8%, about $100 billion by value. Considerably less, actually, if you look at how consumers spend their time. So film is an expensive pastime compared to some other pastimes, most importantly, of course, TV. About 50% of filmed entertainment revenues stay at the retail level, and of the remaining 50%, it's about half and half between distribution and production. Production, interestingly, generates exactly about the same amount of money that it invests every year. So production is a cost centre, not a profit centre. Distribution is where the money is. We've seen relatively robust growth in the film business of about 5.3% compound annual growth rate over the last 10 years. So while we've been through this period of change, film seems to have fared fairly well, and historically has always been fairly successful in adapting to technological and commercial shocks from the advent of sound, colour, commercial television, VHS, cable, DVD, and so on, despite the alarms that film people not accepting Jack Valenti's have sometimes thrown up when faced with new developments. The question is the digital world, the online world, the world of the internet, any different? A few things to say about the economics. The traditional economic model, which involves prototypical production, very high levels of wastage in R&D, very high unit cost of production, high cost of marketing, a very high rate of failure in the marketplace. It's a hit-dependent business model. The impossibility of forecasting demand until the first weekend. Very short shelf life, certainly in the primary market of exhibition. Until very recently, no price elasticity at all in the consumer marketplace, and very, very significant sunk costs. It's very hard to get out of a film once you're into the business of making it. And those characteristics have to be seen in two contexts. One is the intense competition for the consumer's leisure time, and I've never seen any survey which shows film capturing even as much as 3% of the consumer's leisure time, competing with TV, video games, the internet, social networking, radio, music, books, etc., etc. So that's the first context, and that context has the effect of constantly putting pressure, upward pressure on costs in development, production and marketing, so that films can compete with other forms of leisure spend. Some of that is market-driven, the cost of stars, but some of it is actually driven by production values. I mean, Avatar was an expensive movie. Most of that is about delivering something which is very wow for an audience. It's not just about paying a star's salary. And the increase in investment to keep films competitive with other forms of leisure has outpaced the increase in revenues. Revenues have increased, as I've mentioned, but investment has increased more. So that historically there's been a decline in margins in films over recent years. The second context is the context of risk. Every business has risk, but there's not many businesses that have quite such a catalogue of risks that film does, from budget overages, completion risks, risk of suppliers, competition risk, the myriad management risks associated with managing talent, overhead risks, and so on. The key risk is performance. That actually, if you're in the development business, how many of your developed projects get into production? If you're in the production business, how many of your productions get into distribution? If you're in the distribution business, how many of your films are commercially successful? And as you all know, at each of those stages, there is a huge rate of attrition. The performance risk is the most profound. And failure is not just common in film, it's the norm. Film operates what in business school is called a fast-failing business model. You know pretty quickly that you're out of the game. And film is not unique. All businesses with a very high R&D component have very similar characteristics. And I point to the example of biotechnology or life sciences, which has a very similar characteristic to film. The difference being that once you do make a hit drug, it has a much longer shelf life, prospectively, than a movie, which a movie being an experienced good, you only use it once, and that's it. The prize at the end of this road in film is the increasing rate of profit you can achieve with a hit movie. Once a movie's recouped, once you've broken even, your profit rate does not decline like it does in most businesses, it actually increases. And the most recent example of that would be Avatar. The risks associated with film have been mitigated just historically by vertical and horizontal integration and by portfolio investment, for which one needs a degree of concentration of capital. And that's what gave rise to the 6 Hollywood studios, a handful of major companies in a vast sea of tens of thousands of independents who sometimes collaborate with them and sometimes compete. And the key to the dominance of the studios, in my view, is the preeminent role of distribution within the film value chain. Distribution sits in the middle. It determines what gets made. It determines what gets exhibited. It takes significant risks, but also keeps significant margins. Moving on, the question is, does this picture change? Is this picture changing? And that's what I'm going to ask the panel to address. Moving on to strategy, independents mostly haven't had much need for a strategy, least of all a global one. But for the studios, the strategy has been fairly simple and straightforward. They all group themselves under larger conglomerates over the last 3 decades. They compete with each other. They compete with other forms of entertainment. They tend to focus on the biggest single market niche. They tend to try and shape audience demand. And they want to offload risk, but if they do, they don't want to give away any of the distribution margin in doing it, hence the nature of the deals done with hedge funds in recent years. And you could say what they really want is to dominate the world. It may be more nuanced than that, but perhaps not all that much. As we've heard from Ben and from others this morning, the picture, the environment is changing dramatically, partly through technology, digitization and new media, partly through globalization, the world's getting bigger, partly through the localization, which is a paradoxical part of that globalization, audiences wanting what interests them most. And a really important thing, the change in the patterns of consumer behavior. Things we didn't expect to happen, like social networking, which have happened, and things which were perhaps anticipated but no one knew what to do about, the expectation in particular of free content and the expectation of being able to get content now rather than waiting for the window that allows you to see it. The new economic model is a fractured universe. We've had the advent of new aggregators and service providers at the retail end. The retail end of the value chain has become more powerful. Maybe distribution, which sits in the middle, is becoming less powerful. We're seeing at the retail end the renaissance of exhibition. Ben talked about 3D, which is an important part of that. The power of platforms and devices and bundled services. We've seen in music the power of iTunes. It'd be interesting to see what the iPad does in terms of movie consumption, and the prospect of the viability of niches. It's a world in which the consumer increasingly believes themselves to be the producer's equal, and a world that no longer looks to America.